Hello. Thanks for joining us for a special report online. I'm Brett Baer. If this is your first time joining us, welcome. It's a good forum to continue the conversation with our panel. We want to hear from you, so weigh in, type questions, comments. Don't worry, the producers are putting them in as fast as they can, and we'll get to them. Let's bring in our panel. Guy Benson is political editor at townhall.com. Susan Page, Washington bureau chief at USA Today, and Byron York, chief political correspondent of the Washington Examiner. A lot of people are already typing in here. Hello from Hobie Sound, Florida. Florida Barry says. I want to continue the conversation about Congress versus President Trump and what we're seeing here. We had two releases late in the day. First from the Senate Majority Leader on their relationship. This is after the New York Times story on this issue. The President and I and our teams have been and continue to be in regular contact about our shared goals. We have a lot of work ahead of us, and we are committed to advancing our shared agenda together, and anyone who suggests otherwise is clearly not part of the conversation. The White House put out a statement later that said President Donald Trump and Senator Mitch McConnell remain united on many shared priorities, sounds familiar, including middle-class tax relief, strengthening the military, constructing a southern border wall, and other important issues. They will hold previously scheduled meetings following the August recess to discuss these critical items with members of the congressional leadership and the President's cabinet. White House and leadership staff are coordinating regarding the details of those meetings. Okay, Susan, so it sounds like kumbaya, but boy, that story in the New York Times told a story of yelling, screaming matches and ugly kind of talk. And not speaking to one another. And, you know, even Mitch McConnell's statement says that their teams are in contact. That doesn't really mean the two men have talked. I wonder if this is a breach that they can get over for political reasons, because Mitch McConnell could, right? Mitch McConnell's a politician who's into getting things done. He could work with Donald Trump. Will Donald Trump be willing to work with Mitch McConnell and Senate Republicans when he denounced two of them last night at his rally, both Arizona senators, and has said nasty things about Mitch McConnell and called for changes in Senate rules, which, by the way, is not up to the White House? I think it's an open question. Indy Farmer types in, if Congress is not supporting the President's agenda, what good are they? Byron, there's a lot of people out there who say if Congress can't get the stuff done, the President is right to go after him.
Well, one of Trump's strengths is a lot of voters see him as a non-aligned politician. They don't really see him as a Republican, certainly not a Democrat. The problem as far as governing is concerned for Trump is when the opposition party, the Democrats, are unanimously opposed to you, and you alienate half of your own party, well then what are you left with? You're certainly not left with any way to govern. My own sense on some of this major stuff is that a sense of self-interest will ultimately prevail. And when you listen to Donald Trump talk about his achievements, almost everything is executive authority, has been done on executive authority. But the Republicans are all going to run for re-election in the House, a bunch of them in the Senate next year. They want to be able to say they did something. So right. I think they're going to do something. They need a W, Guy. I mean, it's not just the President that needs the W. It's lawmakers.
Yes, and so they need each other on this. So I think Byron's exactly right. Even if there's some palace intrigue and drama behind the scenes, ultimately the President needs Mitch McConnell, because Mitch McConnell, whether you love him or not, is very good at his job. And having a few Republican votes peel off on health care, they really need to get taxes done. They need the President to sign that into law, and the President wants to have a big W and a big celebration at the White House saying we fulfilled a major legislative promise. And you're not going to do that unless you have these various factions come together. And it is, as you say, in everyone's interest to get that done. And I think this is a long-standing conservative policy goal. The fact that President Trump has invested so much emotionally in this as part of his early legacy is a good thing for, I think, congressional Republicans, unless they blow it again. And if they blow it again, then they're in, I think, some serious trouble with their own base. We should say that tax reform is the thing that Trump has actually seemed interested in. He never seemed particularly interested in Obamacare. He wanted to get it done, get it out of the way, and then get on to the fun stuff of tax reform. So this is presumably good for him.
Quinnipiac has some polls out today. Poll 1 is the President's job performance. It's just the newest polls, and obviously people take polls and look at them different ways and how they're run. But this is Quinnipiac. It's well respected. The approval, disapproval, they're 35-59. Question 2 is President Trump doing more to unite or divide the country? Divide overwhelmingly in this poll. And media coverage of the Trump presidency, approve, disapprove, disapprove 55%. What do you take from that, Susan?
Well, so our disapproval rate is almost as high as the president's, so maybe we shouldn't be bragging about anything. I would focus on that second one. By 2-to-1, Americans say the president's doing more to divide us than to unite us. This has been a period of about a week or 10 days where business leaders abandoned the business councils. Winners of the Kennedy Center honors decided they would not go to a White House reception in their honor. There was an NBC Marist poll that showed by 2-to-1 voters in 3 key states, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania, and Michigan, said that they were, 2/3 of voters said they were embarrassed by the president. And it seems to me that that kind of bully pulpit side of the presidency, which is really quite powerful, he's really at risk of losing that, of being able to command the moral authority of this office. And that could have some serious consequences.
I mean, the Trump supporters looked at those polls from those 3 states and said, well, his poll numbers, approval, disapproval, were about the same before the election, and he won all 3 states.
Well, that's true. And that's a fair point, and I think that's a point the president would probably embrace. This is what got me here. On the other hand, you look at his approval rating at 35%. That is 11 points down, double digits down from the portion of the vote that he won the presidency with last November. And then, of course, he didn't win with a majority of the electoral, of the popular vote, although, of course, he did win the Electoral College. So I don't think you can dismiss these polls entirely, but it is true that he won the presidency with record negative numbers, and we should keep that in mind.
Guy, you know, when you talk to people in the middle of the country, a lot of them don't pay attention to the back and forth and the assessment of how the president is on the campaign trail or giving a teleprompter speech. It did seem, however, that the Charlottesville back and forth kind of cut through all of that. And perhaps that's what that number is, that upside down, divide, unite the country number.
It broke through. And if you look at some of the polling and the response to that, if you break it down, his assessment, or the assessment of him and his response to Charlottesville, was very bad overall and not as good as it normally would be, some sort of reflexive Republican response to support him. But when you get into some of the points he was making, for example, who's at fault, a whole lot of Americans agree with him, that it's both sides equally. A plurality, in fact, in several polls now show that they agree with him that it's either both sides equally at fault or the radical left more at fault. So, again, I think the media gets out over its skis sometimes. Everyone talks to each other in New York and D.C., and there's near unanimity about something. And then there's shock and disbelief when polling shows that a lot of Americans may not totally be on board with the consensus in this town. Last point about the Quinnipiac numbers. 59% disapproval rating. That's very bad for a president by any standard in his first year in office, but he had a 61% disapproval rating on Election Day in the exit polls of the electorate that elected him. So I think the numbers matter. I don't think that they're all fake polls, but I do wonder if they apply as much to this politician as they would to virtually any other politician.
Susan writes in, President Trump busy getting ready to drain the swamp, lining them all up, calling them all out. P.S. The polls are wrong. Big surprise. You know, a lot of people just say that, period. The polls are wrong, the polls are wrong, the polls are wrong. You know, you look back at the election, Byron, you know this. The polls were pretty actually close at the very end, if you look at the popular vote. But obviously the state polls didn't factor in the president's attractiveness in some of these places he wasn't supposed to win.
It's true. The horse race poll nationally was fairly close because Hillary Clinton actually won the national popular vote, so it wasn't that far off. If I could link the polling to what we were talking about earlier in the agenda, and that is a president's poll numbers are a measure of how much juice he has on Capitol Hill. And when a lawmaker looks at a president who's at 55% nationally or higher in his or her own state or district, that means one thing. And when a lawmaker looks at a president who's less popular than that lawmaker, then that means something different. And this decreases the president's power to intimidate people because he simply doesn't have the numbers to back it up.
You know, if I
David, let me just say, David says Trump is being Trump. This is who we voted for. If the GOP doesn't want to lose in 18, they need to get on the Trump train. By the way, Jeff Flake is toast.
You know, it's certainly true. David says this is the president who got elected, at a point that you also made. But he got elected running against a rather flawed Democratic candidate, right?
Yeah.
Now he's running against himself. as president, I mean, you're not running it. Even though there were chants of lock her up when he mentioned Hillary Clinton last night at the Arizona speech, Hillary Clinton is no longer his opponent. It's sort of like golf where you're playing against yourself. He needs to show that he can do some of the things that he promised voters he would do. And in that way, I think the disapproval number is more alarming than it was during the campaign when people had just a binary choice.
I mean, the biggest thing that I think happened this week was that the president made a decision on Afghanistan that went exactly opposite to what candidate Trump said he wanted to do on Afghanistan. And the fact that H.R. McMaster and Secretary Tillerson and Secretary Mattis could get him to that decision was a big, big moment. Take Phoenix out of the past couple of days.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right, and it seems like it was so long ago, Brett, that speech was given and that policy was announced. But you have to give Trump some credit here, because one of the knocks on him during the campaign was he's so bullheaded and so stubborn, he won't listen to anyone ever. But on these matters of war and peace, he was very clear in his opposition to U.S. involvement in some of these places, but he always said, I'm going to trust my generals. Now he has surrounded himself with generals. They gave him advice, and he flip-flopped, admitted to it, and explained why. And that's a sign of policy or political maturity that's, I think, a positive thing to see, where he was willing to say, yes, I have the entire virtual paper trail of tweets saying the opposite, but now I'm president. This is the analysis and advice that I've been given, and I'm going with it.
All right.
His instincts in the Afghanistan debate were always very good, which is we have repeated reports of him asking over and over again, after 16 years, why are we still there? So, and now the question is it going to work? I mean, the conventionality of some of this plan is striking, and the similarities to some of the things that we've been doing that did not work for the previous 16 years are striking. So the president always made in the campaign, he always made a distinction between Iraq, and he said the invasion of Iraq was a big fat mistake, and he distinguished between that and Afghanistan. He said it was something we had to do, and he actually during the campaign said that he would keep the troops there, quote, begrudgingly. So it's not a huge flip-flop for him, but this is clearly not in line with the sort of non-interventionism that a lot of his voters thought they were voting for.
Yeah, I mean, the speech sounded, well, it sounded a lot like Secretary Tillerson, frankly, because he came out and did a press conference the next day, and it obviously lined up agenda-wise with him pretty closely. The question is how long that commitment is going to be, and there's no timeline, which is the difference between this and President Obama at West Point.
In some of the rhetoric he used, it was very much like President Obama's rhetoric about why we needed to stay the course in Afghanistan. And in fact, President Trump has doubled down in a way that President Obama refused to do by not setting a timetable for withdrawal and setting rather fuzzy metrics that would enable us to leave. And I think it's entirely possible that he'll end his tenure and we'll still be at war in Afghanistan. And here's the question. That political regulars here in Washington applauded that speech. Will Trump voters also think, yes, this is the right thing to do, or will they think this is not what I voted for?
That's a great question.
I was at an event last night in the Chicago suburbs, a very Trump-heavy crowd. This is his base, and we debated the issue, and big applause for his lines about not nation building, we're going to kill terrorists, and a piece of it also loosening the rules of engagement a little bit. That could actually make a difference. I don't know what that's going to look like. We don't have details on that, but that was a big point that they said, aha, they're going to unshackle these guys and let them go and really kill the bad guys with at least a sense that they've been held back recently.
And Roby, Elizabeth says, can you talk about Pakistan, India? That was the real linchpin of that whole speech, Byron, and also very different is the pressure on Pakistan embracing India, which desperately wants to be a part of the Trump administration or close to it, and that obviously makes Pakistan nervous.
That was the big new thing. And as a matter of fact, you know, the day before, Secretary Mattis, the defense secretary, had said this was going to be kind of a holistic approach, much bigger than just an Afghanistan plan. And actually, when the president unveiled it, it was more like an Afghanistan-Pakistan plan. And so that does distinguish him some. It's not like we've never tried anything in Pakistan and it just didn't work.
But I wouldn't be surprised if we see operations in the Northwest Territory to take out terrorists.
Well, that would distinguish him from previous presidents. Plus, the whole part about not setting a time limit on it. If you went to Trump events, he said this over and over and over during the campaign. Yes. He mocked American presidents for sending troops into action and then announcing when they'd come back, because it meant the enemy could just wait them out. And so that was one thing Trump could not go back on.
And of course, it didn't work for President Obama. He set a timetable withdrawal and then couldn't meet it because the situation on the ground didn't allow it. And yes, that is something he said over and over again. But what if in 4 years, 3 years, or 7 years, whenever the Trump presidency is over, America's longest war has just gotten a lot longer?
Well, we'll say that 3 presidents instead of 2 have been ensnared in the quicksand of Afghanistan.
Like the Russians, like the others. Tara says, yes, finally loosening rules of engagement. Also another big part of it if you talk to special forces on the ground in Afghanistan. Finally, and we have to wrap up early tonight, I want to talk about this ESPN thing. I just want to talk about it because it's the most unifying story of the day. I think no matter your ideology, no matter what you think about anything, the fact that Robert Lee, an Asian-American sportscaster, was kicked off of a Virginia football game because of Robert E. Lee is just mind-boggling. Mind-boggling.
I saw the story last night on Twitter, and I waited because I genuinely thought it was a parody. I thought it was a joke.
The Onion.
And then ESPN came out with their various explanations, which changed over the hours, about, yes, this is true, and here's why. It was truly one of the dumbest, most insane things I've heard in American society in quite some time. And I'll say this from a political standpoint. There were a lot of conservative sports fans who have seen a leftward drift at ESPN, have been calling it out for a number of years now, and it's like ESPN decided to just tear off their suit, and surprise, we actually are a bunch of social justice warriors walking on eggshells. What a catastrophic series of events for them.
And doesn't it seem like when this stuff happens, the ultra politically correct thing, or the analyst who just goes way over his or her skis, it seems to benefit President Trump in some way?
It does. In the larger culture war about Confederate monuments and all of this stuff, this is now talking point number 1 if you think that the side that wants to remove monuments has gone too far.
I'm not sure this is a left and right thing. This is like a stupid thing, right? I mean, I'm not sure this is some big part.
That's what I said. It's not ideological. Robert Lee, I mean, this guy's got... he's got a bright future now.
I agree with you.
Any place besides Virginia.
It's not right versus left, but I don't think it was a bunch of card-carrying right-wingers in the ESPN corner office saying, "Oh, we better pull this Asian guy off the broadcast." I think we know probably what their politics are, and it bled through. Maybe they should have laid off those people.
Yeah, but let me just ask a serious question about the statue stuff. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, when she's House Speaker, she walks through Statuary Hall every day on the way to the House chamber. Never says, well, these statues need to go. President Obama, in 8 years, never had like a moment where the statues were suddenly the moment. And now there's releases from all kinds of Democrats, all kinds of places.
Almost seems like political opportunism.
But I mean, Susan, what do you think about that, the timing of this? Why now? Why is this under President Trump? Because of Charlottesville specifically? I
think that's been a factor. I think if we continue to have demonstrations, even violent demonstrations between white nationalists and those who oppose them around the issue of statues, of Confederate statues, it will fuel this debate. And I also think, but political opportunism also surely part of it.
Yeah. I mean, it's just interesting. I don't think we've seen white nationalists for a long time, until Charlottesville. I mean, obviously they're around, but I don't think they've been present. It's just an interesting timing thing.
Yeah, but we keep talking about overreach and the risk of overreach. If you look at the polling that has come out since this controversy, it's a 2-to-1 margin. The American people don't want these statues taken down. It's 20-something% want them taken down. So that's the base. Democrats might rush out and say, here's our line in the sand. That might not go well for them among a lot of independent voters. And then, Trump, of course, asks the question. He gets dumped on for asking it, but he says, what's next, Jefferson or Washington? And some of the left say, hell yes, let's take them down too. Let's take a poll and see how that goes.
Yeah.
For anyone who wants.
Condi Rice, Charles Barkley, they've all come out with really interesting comments about all this. And on this, Willie says the ESPN anchor should change his name to Bruce Lee. Thank you, Willie. We'll end on that, I guess. Had to go there. Panel, thank you. Appreciate it. Special report online every Wednesday. We try. We'll see you next Wednesday.